This is the best of Empty the Bench with Tom Albano, Nick Morgeson, and Nick Federa on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 1 of the best of Empty the Bench, along with Nick Federa and Tom Albano. I'm Nick Morgeson. Gentlemen, it's been a long year. We've had COVID to deal with. We've had political protests to deal with. We've had NBA, NFL, MLB, even throw in NHL while we're at it. But guys, it's been a crazy year.
Yes, it has. It's been like the world's most demented version of Mad Libs.
And the strange part is that it was still more normal of a year than last year was. It wasn't a normal year, and in fact, it's ending in craziness now with the NFL and NHL and even a little bit of the NBA being invaded by COVID. And MLB, well, let's see, the negotiation table is still pretty empty as far as I can see.
We go live to this tumbleweed. What have you got to say to yourself, Mr. Tumbleweed?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Just like the MLB negotiations.
Exactly. So really, we started off with COVID, and back to COVID we return. So it's really a circular moment here.
Sunrise, sunset.
So for the first, and actually we should say what this show is because we haven't said it yet. So this is our best of interviews episode. So we're going to do 3 best ofs. This is interviews. We're going to have best clips. We're going to have best moments in the other 2. But we actually did some unique interviews, even though in COVID where we couldn't have contact with a lot of people, we actually did have contact with the outside world. So the first interview that we did, because we kind of all separated in some aspects to do some of these interviews, I sat down with Jay Mariotti at the beginning of this year. It seems like a long time ago. Wow, May 20th. That feels like moons ago.
It wasn't even a full episode. It was a little special.
Yes, when we were doing our bench talks, which we should try to bring those back one day. But yeah, so this was all back at a time where we were railing against ESPN layoffs and how I think we all screamed. We did a separate individual video on ESPN layoffs when they laid off 300 people.
I will tell you one thing. A lot of the clips that we pulled from that period reflected how angry we were at ESPN.
I mean, it's not just even ESPN. Sorry to give maybe a little spoiler, but in one of the future best ofs, we also were talking about the TSN and the Bell Media layoffs before the ESPN layoffs happened this year.
Just future warning. You're welcome. Just saying. But yes, so here we go. Enough talking for this one. You're going to listen to an interview I did with Jay Mariotti talking about ESPN. We talked about Levitard, who got his new deal with DraftKings, and we talked about a lot of different things. So go check that out now. So in what ways do you think the pandemic has already affected the sports media landscape, and how do you think it's going to affect it going forward?
Oh, I think it's devastating because, as you've seen, sports leagues, sports franchises now are in total control of how relationships between media and athletes, coaches, managers are going to exist in the future. And because of Zoom, nobody gets exclusives anymore. You've really got to cultivate a relationship with an agent or an athlete, and that's frowned upon these days. I'm worried about the future because as it is, we've seen sports leagues kind of devour the sports media. It's very difficult to you knew me as a rock and roll columnist. I mean, for 30-some years, I was able to pretty much write what I wanted in Chicago, at AOL, any number of places, Denver, Cincinnati. I don't know if I could exist anymore in that traditional media structure. Hell, on Around the Horn, which you referenced earlier. I mean, I was very opinionated on there. A couple of times they had to restart the segment because, oh no, you can't say that. Well, why not? Who am I pissing off? Now I couldn't exist on that show because I would be too opinionated. It would get under the skin of one of their bedfellows with MLB or the NFL or the NBA or you name it, just go down the line. So as it was, the media were being swallowed up. Now, because of the pandemic, as you mentioned, I fear moving forward that it's just going to be totally controlled by big money, and the TV networks are now completely part of that umbrella, and it's going to be very difficult to be a fiercely independent writer as I am. Other than Van Pelt, they're not in the business anymore of paying seven-figure salaries to SportsCenter anchors, keeping in mind that they just did this whopper deal with the NFL over the next 11 years. I think it's something like $18 billion a year. Now they're in the Super Bowl rotation twice in the next 10 years. They have to trim. Disney had a rough year. Amusement parks, rough. Hollywood, rough. ESPN hung in there, but there's a mandate from on high at Disney. You got to slash. Well, Kenny Mayne's contract was up. Kenny was making a pretty penny, and they told him, look, you're going to have to take a major pay cut. And to his credit, he said, take this job and shove it. I don't want this job anymore. I don't need this job. And I think he'll do okay. But what you find out about most people who leave ESPN of their own volition, other than maybe Dan Patrick and Rich Eisen, a lot of people fall off the bone and they never reemerge the way they were in terms of prominence at ESPN. So it's a little bit of a gamble for Kenny, but also he's been a big-time player, and this is the way I look at it personally, for 30 years in this country, in this business. I mean, that's a long run, and he was able to do his own shtick. He was able to do SportsCenter, and I'm kind of a critic of guys who don't take it seriously, but I watched him last night. He was able to pull off, tongue-in-cheek, a sportscast without letting his shtick get in the way. It wasn't, somebody wearing a hat or somebody dancing, or this was just Kenny being Kenny. It works. Obviously, they weren't going to use him as a prominent SportsCenter anchor. That is Van Pelt, that's Anderson, that's Butchie Gross. I think they were trying to tell Kenny, you're going to become a part-timer. And he said, I've had it, and God bless him. I mean, I can't even imagine working at ESPN for that long. That he was able to survive that long is a credit to him.
We were talking about how you can't say certain things today. You can get away with some things years ago. What do you make of today's cancel culture in both sports and the media landscape? I know you like to give your opinions and like to say things a little more fiery, but what do you make of cancel culture?
I mean, some people should be canceled. Some people are a victim of cancel culture. I don't have a problem with canceling Harvey Weinstein, and I could give you a long list. I do have a problem with just canceling for the sake of canceling because somebody's got a device in his hand, his or her hand, and can go after somebody and feel powerful for the only time in your life. It's this mob mentality I don't like. Again, if somebody has done something criminally or ethically wrong, yeah, fine, go after them hard. And in general, it's fine to debate Mario Cuomo, for instance. It's a great debate. But let's not go off the rails, lie, and I think I've lost that argument. I mean, there's so much deceit and lying on social media. It's pathetic. It's hard to even read. It's just a mishmash of hell. No, I don't like, in general, the phrase cancel culture refers to, we're all going to decide in a mob in the media, we're going to get rid of you. We don't like you. Okay, have you investigated? Have you done your homework? You really know what's going on here. Now, somebody who should be canceled and invoked that phrase was Bob Baffert, who, believe it or not, after his 30th something Horus tests positive a couple of weeks ago, he actually invoked the phrase, this is cancel culture. No, Bob, you're a cheat. You're a dirtball. And horses are dying in this country, and you're using cancel culture? Yeah, you should be canceled, Bob. And I think he has been.
With there being what it seems a lot of money in podcasts and digital, and I guess I can refer to one big deal, Le Batard, when he left ESPN for Meadowlark Media to create their company with Skipper and to get the $50 million deal with DraftKings. It seems you don't have to belong to a brand, an entity, or a network these days. Do you believe that that's the case, that you can basically just go out on your own and you don't have to be under the restrictions of networks or companies anymore?
It's tough because even Le Batard, as I've written, had to sell out because of this deal with DraftKings. And as you know, if you read my column, I am completely anti-gambling. And I think that, to address what you're asking me, it certainly helps if a podcaster has a gambling association, because that's where all the money is. I'm not recommending anybody do that. You're selling out. You got to read ads. Dan is Mr. I Need My Freedom, but you're going to hear Dan go, that parlay tomorrow night looks good, as you hear on WFAN every day. I'm sorry, I can't go down. I like sports and report sports and comment sports as somebody independent of gambling. It's an alternate universe that isn't real. It's a point spread, it's a prop bet, and it really has nothing to do with the actual authentic game we're watching. It's the side thing, which it always was until all the money invaded sports media, and now everybody's jumping into it, including ESPN, Fox, everybody hog wild on this. What I would tell a podcaster is, be true to yourself. If you believe in the convergence of gambling and media, then go get yourself an association with a gambling company. I'm sure they'll help you. If you don't believe in gambling like me, you got to go at it on your own. I'm a guy who's had, 30, 35 years in this industry and on a big level. And I'm not really trying to be that competitive these days. I've fortunately, made a nice living, but I do a lot of podcasts with people in their 20s and they're wondering how to get ahead. It's tough because it's such a scattered industry. Everything's stretched out like an old shirt. It used to be there were only 100, 150 good jobs in this industry. Now I think that number has even shrunk even more, but there are at least, 10,000 sports podcasts out there. Nobody has the time to listen to more than one or two. So it's a tough road out there. You have to distinguish yourself. And I still believe the best way to do that is by breaking news till the day we all die, the earth ends. People are going to want to know what they don't know. So somebody can differentiate by breaking news and also being an intelligent, thoughtful, don't go in the gutter, don't be Dave Portnoy commentator. If you do that, people are going to believe in you or agree or disagree, but make sure you have a point of view. And I think a lot of guys today are trying to keep their jobs and they're kind of soft. They've gone mushy. And, now more than ever, I think we really need pointed commentary. You got to keep sports leagues and teams honest, got to be watchdogs. That's what I would tell young podcasters. And then hopefully the money comes after that. But got to tell you, most of the revenue sources these days are in gambling. And I'm never, ever going down that road. I've had gambling companies call me. I laugh. I said, do you realize what I stand for? I tell them, if you want to hire me, and I'm not going to read a single gambling ad, and I'm going to rip the idea from time to time of people even gambling on this and the number of probable gamblers we have in this country, I'll do it as long as I don't have to attach myself to your agenda. Well, it's not going to happen. So it's a crazy business right now. I'm glad I was in it when all of this wasn't going on. I wish people luck who are going to continue on in it, but I'm telling you, it's harder than ever to find a high profile, big money niche. It's 1%, but much less than 1%.
Well, Nick, that was a great opportunity you had to interview Jay Mariotti. Of course, I remember Jay Mariotti from the Around the Horn days with his little feud with Woody Page. But we go from one personality to the next. We go from ESPN to Sports Illustrated, something else that I've followed since my teenage years, and specifically Jimmy Traina, who was also a bench talk that we did about a month after Jay Mariotti. And with Jimmy Traina, we were talking about the ESPN layoffs. At the time, we were still talking about ESPN layoffs, but we were also just talking about the change in the media landscape in general, specifically paywalls, specifically like things like ESPN Plus and all these different streaming services, the change of the landscape of ESPN, the departures of the likes of Kenny Mayne, Dan Lebitard, even Ariel Helwani, and talking about cord cutting. And Jimmy Traina is not a guy of the modern streaming era, let's say.
He said he would rather have a remote than deal with streaming platforms. And also, we talked about plus platforms. Now, I know one line that didn't make it in there, which I totally didn't realize, but I think I said even Grubhub has a plus app.
They do.
Yeah, they did, and he was kind of really angry about that, and it shows in the interview. It's a great listen. So,
Which, by the way, I need to throw a plug before we go. Empty the Bench Plus is coming soon.
Oh no! Don't say that.
it's
That's
been
gonna-
plus. You know what? It's just NFTs of us yelling.
You know what? That's going to be a merch. ESPN empty the. Oh my god! I almost said ESPN Plus. Empty the Bench Plus is
Cease and
coming.
desist letter.
WWE, damn it! Cease and desist. Oh God, I'm getting delusional. All right, just throw the Jimmy Traina interview. I need time. Go. Tom and I grew up watching the traditional ESPN in the 90s and early 2000s. Now we're seeing ESPN going through the layoff phase. We saw it at the beginning of the pandemic, and now we're hearing names moving all over the place. The latest rumor is Neil Everett might be out at SportsCenter. What do you make of all the moves at ESPN? Are they getting rid of names because they're going away from personality driven, or are they just doing it for money purposes?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of issues. I think it's a little bit of a market correction. I think the new regime, Jimmy Pitaro, who's the president, inherited all these big contracts from the last regime and John Skipper. And, you know, the traditional sports center isn't what it was in terms of viewership because of streaming and social media and the way we consume news differently. So I think there's a little bit of a market correction going on, just trying to say, hey, you know, we're not paying SportsCenter anchors this kind of money. Obviously, the Van Pelt situation is different. That it's really not SportsCenter; it's really the Scott Van Pelt show. So you have that going on. You know, I'm sure, you know, ESPN took a hit during the pandemic when we had 3 months of no sports. Maybe that's a factor here a little bit. And just, you know, it's about saving money. I think, you know, cost cutting. And then, you know, there's going to be, ESPN's going to put a lot of their resources into ESPN Plus, like every company going to streaming. So kind of a lot of layers to it.
So now to specifically get into, you know, a different number of specific people at ESPN who have recently left. Obviously, probably the biggest one as of late is Kenny Mayne, the longtime SportsCenter anchor. Do you think ESPN generally wanted to keep him and renegotiate his salary, or was his leaving just an inevitability?
Yeah, listen, they asked him reportedly to take a 61% pay cut. When you do that, you're basically saying, thanks for coming, but it's time to move on. So again, he was making good money, you know, over $1 million or whatever. Again, 61% though is pretty drastic. I just think they didn't want him. And that one's a little tough because you'd like to think there would be some, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, some cachet there for him being there so long and being one of the old guard, but sentimentality doesn't really have a chance against money. So they asked him to take the 61% pay cut. He says no, and he's no longer with the company.
I mean, keeping it to the personality part of the company, I heard you talking to Stu Gatz. You did an interview with him in your last episode, and you were talking about Levitard and what their 24-hour extravaganza with Freedom. And I think it's interesting that Levitard kind of separated. There was a political issue. There was other issues. What do you make of that situation? And was it inevitable that just they didn't fit there anymore, or was there ever a chance that maybe it could have been fixed in any way?
No, I think it was inevitable. It was always a weird marriage. The Levitard show didn't seem to get the sort of push that other ESPN shows and personalities got. And I think the show was maybe a little too out there for ESPN. It's not a hot take show. It's not a debate show. That's what ESPN loves. I had written this, once they had that incident where Donald Trump said at a rally, "Go back to where you came from," and then Dan talked about that the next morning as the son of parents who immigrated from Cuba. And ESPN basically gave him a slap on the wrist for it. And there were meetings. Once that happened, I knew that relationship was doomed, because for him to get in trouble for that is absurd. Then they cut his show. I know they moved the show from, I don't know the logistics of the television side of it, but it was from ESPN ESPN Radio. I don't know.
And to the plus.
So you saw the writing on the wall. And then as Stugatz told me on my SI Media pod, once ESPN decided to lay off Chris Cody from the show, that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for Dan Le Batard.
I just want to follow up the money that they got from DraftKings. I'm sure that kind of went a long way to saying, let's do our own content. I know that Le Batard eventually went back with Skipper. There was kind of pretentious relationship with him and ESPN. Was Skipper kind of I don't know, would you say kind of defended Dan as the only guy that accepted his content?
Yeah, Skipper was a Le Batard guy. And once Skipper left, that's when things sort of deteriorated between Le Batard and ESPN.
Now, moving on to one other name who actually just recently left ESPN as well. I believe the day we're actually recording this is his last day at ESPN. That's Ariel Helwani. Came to ESPN in 2018, around the time where ESPN got the rights to the UFC. And now after 3 successful years, it seems that this is the end. With how successful the focus of MMA has been on for ESPN, is the decision for him to part ways with ESPN surprising? And on top of that, he's going to the Action Network on a 1-year deal. It's not exclusive, so he can go, say, back to SB Nation or back to Fox Sports. But is it still surprising that he's joining the Action Network, considering he's more of a interviews personality? He's not really about the betting odds of this side of things.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it. Everything about this was strange. Like, to me, this was a more surprising departure than Kenny Mayne. Kenny Mayne's an older guy. He's been there forever. He's on SportsCenter, which, like we said, doesn't have the cachet once did. Whereas with Ariel, like, I was, he fits perfectly into ESPN. I mean, they air UFC, they air MMA. He's the top reporter for that sport. That one surprised me. Again, he was a guy, I guess, making a lot of money, and ESPN's trying to trim salary. But, I'm surprised they let him go. I was surprised he went to the Action Network. I thought he'd maybe go to a more traditional place. I don't follow MMA, UFC, whatever it is. So I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I would think he would be great at a company that had no ties to MMA. So I guess Action Sports fits that, because I know he's had some issues with Dana White. So, if he goes and works for a company that is partners with Dana White, it's tough for him. So I could see him trying to, not get associated with a company that's in bed with UFC. But I was surprised it would be Action Sports Network, to be honest with you.
Talking to Jimmy Traina of Sports Illustrated. Jimmy, over the past few years, we've seen sports betting companies, speaking of DraftKings, have an increased presence within the sports media itself. How do you think it's going to, moves like this with the Ariel joining the Action Network, how do you think it's going to affect those outlets? And could these kinds of moves be damaging to, say, the human element interviews and feature stories we see on, say, 30 for 30 or E60?
I don't think it'll be damaged. Listen, you're always going to have people who do that stuff. I don't think that's going to be a factor. What was the first part of your question? I mean, listen, it's a great move for the Action Sports Network. If I don't know what their goal is with Ariel, is it to have him focus on sort of the betting angles with the MMA, or is it to have him still do news? I think there's a lot of value in him still being a news person, doing interviews, breaking stories. That'll only help Action Sports Network. I don't know what the plan is, though, for him over there. This is all, kind of new.
I mean, moving over to more of the plus platforms, because that seems to be the hot topic of the month. I mean, Tom and I were discussing that Grubhub all of a sudden now has a plus app. Everything has a plus app now, it seems like. So what do you make of the future of potential online plus platforms as opposed to traditional TV? Would you rather just be able to say, I can take my remote, press a button and watch TV, or do you think that this is the way we're going with Plus apps?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad this is all happening on the, after my peak of sports fandom, because I would have hated this when I was a diehard watch every sport kind of guy, because it's just so fractured and you need to have subscriptions to so many different apps and streaming services. So I'm not a fan of it. I hate it. But this is the way it's going to be. I mean, people under 30 don't even know what cable is. But yeah, I much prefer watching things on TV with cable than streaming. But that, whether I like that or not, is irrelevant. Everything is about streaming and niche products.
Welcome back to the best of Empty the Bench. We want to say another thank you to Jimmy Traina for helping out with us and putting up with our shenanigans. So next, we have a repeat guest, the return of Zig Fracassi. And Zig was, episode number 69. Nice. But still, full disclaimer. A lot of what we were talking about, and Zig is always a great interview. He really has a lot to say. He's very spirited. But a lot of what the interview was concerning Deshaun Watson, and we did not know then what we know now.
Oh, it's crazy what we know now. Was this like during the whole Busby situation yet, or no?
I believe, actually, let me check here our episode number. I can try to match up the date.
I don't think that had happened.
August 1st. No, oh no, wait, January 23rd. No, the thing hadn't happened yet. We were just talking about his pending, his feud with the Texans and pending maybe where he was going to play, if he was going to try to sit out. I mean, he sat out this whole season anyway, but for completely other reasons.
Yeah, completely different reasons. And Zig, to his credit, he did not mince words or hold anything back, which is one of the great things about Zig. We actually, just to tell you just how long this year has gone, we were also talking about Phillip Rivers retiring. And it seems like an eternity ago he did that. That seems
like a decade ago at this point.
You know what else was feels like a decade ago? No, you mentioned how Zig is a repeat guest. Zig, if you guys remember, when we had him first, was on the Unspoken podcast.
Yes, he was.
We weren't even doing this show.
Yeah. And Zig really, like I said, Zig really is a great guest. So let's just throw it to him. Roll him, Smokey.
Oh, wait, before you go there, I think Zig is on the leaderboard, right? For most appearances on this show.
Him and Freddie.
And Jesse Rogers.
And Jesse. We've spoken to Jesse before.
But like you said, passion is not an issue with Zig. So.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So let's see what he's got to say. Roll him, Smokey.
Speaking of bad blood, an organization not in the playoffs right now, the Texans. So Deshaun Watson and the owner McNair having words, not being able to agree on a coach. We have text messaging and phone tag going back and forth. Do you see Watson moving on, and what do you see going on with the Texans organization?
Boy, they're a poop show of all poop shows right now. My gosh. I mean, this was a team. This was a playoff team not even that long ago, but then they decided to, make Bill O'Brien the GM and head coach. And then he makes that ridiculously bad trade with the Dolphins. They give up those number 1 picks for Tunzel, who I think is an average tackle. I don't think he's Orlando Pace or anybody of that ilk. So
the answer to a trivia question.
Yeah. And the thing is, now there's all this circulation that Deshaun wants out and that he may want to come to New York. Well, if you're the Jets, I could see the thumbs up there. Well, I'm telling you this right now. If that happens, they better consider Texans better at least ask for 3 number 1 draft picks and Sam Darnold just to get to the table. So we'll see if that ultimately happens. But I think in the final analysis, Caserio, the new GM, wants to build around Deshaun Watson. And if they do wind up hiring Bieniemy, which I think is a reasonable possibility, because from what I'm told, Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes are pretty tight, and Patrick raves about Bieniemy. Notice Houston hasn't hired their head coach yet, which may be coincidence that Leslie Frazier, also the Bills' defensive coordinator, is still in the mix, as is Eric Bieniemy. If they hire Bieniemy, he stays put in Houston, I think.
I just want to follow up with one thing.
Sure.
Which is the whole PR situation going on with the Texans, and they hired a whole, I don't know what you want to call it, marketing or whatever situation to try to find a coach. What do you make of that whole situation?
I think, again, they're a team that seems to be in a little bit of disarray, and I think a lot of that's because of the son running the team now. Cal McNair believes his name. Of course, Robert was a guy that seemed to have this aura of doing things with class as a gentleman and all this, and now you got the kid running the team. And, I mean, they also, let's not forget, they also had that fiasco with the young PR lady who, from what I could tell, was one of the best at what she did, and now she doesn't fit the culture. What the hell does that mean? So you had that. J.J. Watt seems to be disgruntled. He may want out. I wouldn't be surprised he winds up with his brothers in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
They may wind up working a deal at that particular point. The Texans are a mess, and like I said, now, if you trade Watson, that signals to me that Caserio has got a major rebuild on his hands. And they also, like you mentioned, hiring firms and all this to kind of clean up the mess. I'm not sure Houston's a preferred destination for anybody at this particular point. Obviously, it's a big city. You've had some recent success with the Astros, but, the James Harden thing with the Rockets, you never knew what happened there. So is Houston, the cliche from the day, with NASA, Houston, we have a problem. There's definitely a problem with the Houston Texans.
He knows the shuttle's exploding when he sees it. So,
in
terms of that, so in terms of quarterbacks, now that Phillip Rivers has officially decided to call it quits, I'm not here to argue his bona fides, because he's definitely got the stat sheet to back up a trip to Canton, maybe in a couple of years. But I want to know, Zig, since Phillip Rivers started off his career getting traded from the Giants to the Chargers on draft day, and I want to know, do you really think that the Giants would have been able to win those two Super Bowls with Phillip Rivers?
Well, that's hard to say. Because obviously they developed a style and an offense around Eli. So I suppose, then the logic would be, well, would Rivers have been the same quarterback? We don't know that for sure. So from a hypothetical standpoint, I suppose, you look at it, would they have had to alter the offense too? Would they have gone more even pass heavy? Because at least with the Giants, with Eli, you had a component of a running game to go with too. So that's kind of hard to say. You mentioned, Nick, in terms of the Hall of Fame, the stats and the way that the writers, the Pro Football Hall of Fame writers, vote nowadays would say yes, he gets in. I was doing updates yesterday during Mad Dog Russo's update, and he was talking with Phil Simms about Phillip Rivers, and the stats are sure there. And maybe playing that year in the championship game without an ACL was his moment. Because, he gutted through that against the Patriots. So full marks to that. And he did win a fair share of games, but there was never, to me, he didn't get to a Super Bowl. He didn't have that sort of signature drive that elevated his team. So if I'm voting, I would say no. I think Roethlisberger and Breeze are probably more Hall of Famers than Phillip Rivers is. But again, there's also distinction that not everyone belongs in. And just because you hang around a long time and pile a lot of stats, you can go through any of the sports Hall of Fames guys and really start looking at things. The way they vote nowadays, if you hang around long enough and put up the numbers, you're in. Again, class act, and I hope he does great coaching his high school kids and all that. But if it's me, I lean towards Phillip Rivers as the Hall of the very good and not Canton. But again, that's just me.
All right, we're back here on the best of Empty the Bench. We just got done with Zig Fracassi, who I actually happen to know from my intern days at SiriusXM, but we went one step better. and we actually talked to the guy that I interned with on Sirius at Mad Dog Radio, and actually now he's on NFL Radio, which Zig is on as well. So we kind of stayed in the Sirius NFL realm. Bruce Murray joined us. I kind of made everybody feel old because that was all the way back in, dare I say, 2011.
When you interned?
Yes.
Wow.
So, yes, 10 years ago, or almost 11 years ago, I should say. And we basically broke it all down. Like Nick said, 69 nice in the last segment. We did talk Patriots and this pretty interesting book that came out, basically exposing Tom Brady sailing out of town, going to the Bucs, winning a Super Bowl, la-di-da-di-da, no one cares. And then we talked about the Bears quarterback situation.
Well,
Which, again, benefit of hindsight.
Well, we did know at the time. We were thinking that the Patriots might be at their wits' end, but now, I mean, it wasn't on this episode. I don't know if it was on this episode. It wasn't during the interview, I know for certain, but I called it Mac Jones Rookie of the Year. He is having a hell of a campaign.
You did. It was this episode. I
By the
remember.
way, what's tomorrow's lotto numbers, Nostradamus? I like my chances.
That's Nostradamus to you.
Yes.
Actually, instead of that, it's Nostradamus.
Wow. Okay. You want to do that?
Oh! And while he's gone, we're going to throw to this great interview with Bruce Murray. Enjoy!
So obviously we're in week 4, and the big game coming up this week is the Buccaneers against the Patriots. It's Tom Brady's first game in Foxborough as a Buccaneer. And coincidentally, around the same time, we have this book that's about to be released on the New England Patriots of the dynasty era and the relationships between Kraft, Belichick, and Brady, all the tensions behind the scenes. What do you make of this book that's going to come out?
Well, listen, I'm sure it's going to have some explosive stuff in it because you need to sell books. I don't know that there's going to be anything that is going to be earth-shattering in it. I think we all understand what went on behind the scenes. I don't think there was this massive desire on the part of Bill Belichick to force Tom Brady out of town. I personally don't. I think, I hate to say it, anybody that's been involved in a relationship for a long time, and I'm married for almost 30 years, there comes a time when you're like, I wonder if there's something better out there. And not if you're married, by the way. I hope my wife's not listening. I love my wife. But, you always think, well, maybe there's something more exciting out there. And, in marriage, you've got to make things work. In football, you can say, let me see if there's something better. I think Brady was frustrated with the way things were going in New England. I think Belichick, to some extent, when it came down to that Garoppolo situation, may have wanted to move forward with Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think he thought he had his quarterback of the future, and Tom Brady's time was going to end sooner than later, which, of course, we've learned is not the case. We know where Kraft sat in the situation. Obviously, I don't want to say aligning because it sounds like there's a division. He was a Brady guy. But, listen, relationships over time do break down. It just happens. So I don't think it's anything. I don't think Bill Belichick forced him out of town. I don't think Tom Brady hated everybody and wanted to leave. I just think after 20 years, they were just ready to kind of move on and find something else. And of course, we saw how it worked out for Tom Brady. And I think it's going to be a while before New England figures this whole thing out.
I don't know what standing that puts you in with Patriots fans. Because would that piss them off? I'm genuinely asking, Bruce.
Well, does that say? I mean, in what way does it anger them that Brady? Like, tell me what that means.
Does it mean that because it seems like the Patriots are not Patriots fans are not? They don't even know what a rebuilding season is. So, are we talking about denial on their part, or?
Yeah, I listen. It's amazing to me. I think we're all old enough to remember before Tom Brady, the Patriots were a floundering organization. Yes, it's not like they had great years on a regular basis. They went to the Super Bowl, lost to the Bears with Steve Grogan. That's a long time ago in the 80s. There's a generation of fans that have grown up, kind of like Yankees fans in the late 80s, into 2000, that have no idea what it's like to lose. I mean, they just don't. And the reality of this league is that, guess what? You're going to learn the hard way that it's just not that easy to kind of transfer out
and maintain that level of excellence. You know, the idea, look, Bill Belichick is a great coach. We love to throw out the term genius. I think he's a great coach. I don't know what it means to be a genius. You know, Bill Walsh to me was a genius because created things that we never saw before in this league. Bill Belichick is a really good coach. He understands how to put good players in the right position to succeed. He's not an incredible evaluator. Their drafts haven't been phenomenal. You know, they've tried a number of different things that haven't worked. And look, unless I'm wrong, if Mac Jones turns out to be a seamless transition, and by the way, anybody who's calling him the next Tom Brady, can we stop? Peyton Manning, if he was coming into the league right now, wouldn't be the next Tom Brady. You don't all of a sudden identify the second greatest quarterback of all time just because he looks the part. It's not easy. And that's where it starts. You better have that guy on the weekends. They weren't a good team last year. They made a major investment into free agency. I still don't see a roster that's built out with great football players. I think they're not coming to terms with it. I think they do live in denial. I think that's a good way to say it. But they're going to learn how hard it is to win in the National Football League on a regular basis very soon.
What do you make of this whole mess?
That's a difficult one too. You know, again, I'll use the words of my co-host, who again was a former MVP in the league, Rich Gannon, who called it coaching malpractice this week. I don't know what the explanation is. I know what the explanation was, and all the football fans that said Nagy was doing this by design. He wanted him to fail. Let me tell you something. These guys want to win. Not only do they want to win every game, and there's only 17 of them, they want to keep their jobs. And going out there and doing that to a rookie doesn't help you keep your job. It's just really difficult to explain exactly why. Here's a guy that learned under Andy Reid. He understands situational football, and there are so many questions. You know, they didn't run a game plan that allowed him to play to his strengths. They rolled him out twice in that game, I think. They didn't offer any extra protection. Once you're sacked 5 times or 6 times, you'd think you'd keep 2 tight ends in or a fullback in or something. You'd be chipping Myles Garrett. We didn't see that. You'd think you'd put Fields on the bench at some point after 5 or 6 sacks. I don't have an explanation for any of it. And you know what? Matt Nagy didn't provide one this week. He just didn't. So this is one of those things where we want to blame, and he's the easy guy to blame. I'm not saying he's not. But everybody thinks they have the answer to why it worked out that way. And without being in the meeting rooms, without understanding why they did certain things, I could not provide you a plausible explanation for why we saw what we did in Cleveland last week.
One last thing from us, another quarterback situation, Bruce. We've heard reports and rumors this week that Eagles ownership has approved to try to get a trade for Deshaun Watson. Now we know the whole situation between the Texans and Deshaun, plus Deshaun's own personal issues over this past year. Should this be something that the Eagles do? What did they have to give up? And what about Jalen Hurts? I mean, he's looked good during the end of last season and the start of this season. Would he have to go to Houston in a trade like this?
Well, let's use Miami as an example because they were the first team that was in the sweepstakes. And the reports were that they're willing to trade him to Miami, but they don't want Tua in return, which you'd say, well, that makes no sense. I mean, but they evaluate Tua, and they may think they want to go in a different direction. And if they trade him, maybe they'll be in a position to draft a guy. I don't know what Houston thinks of Jalen Hurts. So to say that he'd go back in a deal, they may not want to take on Jalen Hurts and what he brings. They may just want to start fresh. If you're asking me, and by the way, look, much like the conversation in Miami, I'll say the same thing because I was an advocate of Tua's. But when you've got a chance to get Deshaun Watson, it's not about what about the guy we have. It's, are we getting better at the position? And Deshaun Watson's one of the top 5 guys at his position in the league, top 7, whatever you want. He's an MVP caliber player every year. If you can get him, go out and get him. And for those that say, well, he may be suspended, he may have to sit 8 games, you deal with it. He's under contract. If you lose him for 8 games this year, but you have him for 5 years, and you have one of the best players every Sunday, go get him. That's what I would say. There aren't too many teams right now that could say, we're not better with Deshaun Watson as our quarterback, no matter who their quarterback is, except for, like I said, in Green Bay and Tampa Bay and, Kansas City. I mean, we don't have to go through all the names, but you know what I mean. Are you better in Denver with Teddy Bridgewater or Deshaun Watson? And Teddy Bridgewater's off to a good start. If you can get better at that position with a young player, go out and get him.
So coming up next on the best of Empty the Bench, it's actually, I think, one of our most accomplished interviews. It's Michael Duarte of NBC Los Angeles, and this was the height of the Trevor Bauer, sexual assault, rape allegations, and this was a unique perspective because Michael was able to tell us, Tom and I, basically give us a blow by blow reporting of what was going on in that courtroom, which again was news to me, news to him.
He was in there, and he went so in depth. We were reviewing this interview like we've been reviewing the interviews for the best of for this show, and we barely even needed to ask any questions because he talked a lot and he went into so much detail.
And what people don't realize, this whole situation dominated the MLB headlines. Like, people forgot about the regular season. People forgot about the playoffs.
It was most of the narrative for the Dodgers this season. Well, over the summer at least.
Now, we don't know, and I think where we left off on the interview, at least from where I pulled from, was that they weren't sure what MLB was going to do. Now, he's still under contract, technically, with
earlier this month, he exercised his player option. No surprise, considering the situation.
Well, no surprise that he's making $40 million either. I mean,
but the interview just gets better with time. So,
I mean, if we could have shown the whole thing, we would have. That's how good this interview was. I went back and I watched it afterwards.
Go look it up on our YouTube page.
It was really good. Go check it out.
To go into the ruling that you spoke of by the judge yesterday, and this is a Superior Court LA judge, lower level, who's dealing with these restraining order cases. Leading into that, Trevor Bauer's team, and it looked like his goal was to try to delay this hearing as long as they could. And I'm not sure if that was to try to just get him to the finish line of the MLB regular season, as far as be on paid leave for the remainder of the way, get your full contract that you're going to get paid anyway without having to pitch the entirety of the second half, and then hope that you can do the hearing after that, then MLB's investigation and the Pasadena Police Department's investigation, and if anything overlaps or if there's anything, in the testimony that could harm him in any way in these other investigations, that hopefully he had delayed it. But the judge said, no, this is happening, and it was happening last week. There's no more delays. We're doing this now. And so to me, that was a indicator that, okay, she was a little fed up with his team and their tactics. And, that was good news for the accuser in that case. Now, as we go along, the accuser testifies for almost 10 hours over 3 days, long, grueling questions. Sorry about that.
All right.
Long, grueling questions where she gets hammered by both sides, especially Trevor Bauer's attorneys in this case. So, and then Trevor Bauer doesn't have to take the stand at all. He was only going to answer 2 questions: his name and he plays Major League Baseball as a pitcher. So that wasn't, and then plead the fifth for every other question he would have been asked. So the judge doesn't make him take the stand at all because of that. So everything that is the point I'm getting, guys, here is that everything was leading, in my opinion, that the restraining order was going to be granted and extended for the full maximum 5 years. And even in the closing arguments, outside of the judge kind of interrupting the accuser's attorney's comments, where she kind of made it more personal, where she started to get into Trevor Bauer's past, where she started to call him a monster and get into those things and stray away from the facts of the case, the facts that they had presented in this hearing on why the restraining order needed to be extended. I was still saying at that time, it looks like the judge is going to extend this. Then we went into the defense's closing arguments. Miss Holly, Trevor Bauer's attorney, Sean Holly's closing statements, and she was all over the place and veering from personal attacks to like slut shaming, as they say, against the accuser, to the past men she's been in relationships with, like Fernando Tatis and Mike Clevenger, another former Indian teammate of Trevor Bauer's, who's now on the Padres. It was really kind of all over the place, going into her past as an alcoholic, not focusing on the things I thought she should be focusing on, which was This is a domestic violence restraining order request. In order for that to be granted, you have to establish there's a relationship between Trevor Bauer and the accuser, and you have to prove that she is an imminent threat. Trevor Bauer is an imminent threat to the accuser as we speak, which is why the restraining order would have need to be granted. Those are the 2 points that they can argue and win, but they didn't do it. And they went in this long closing argument that strayed and went everywhere. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're shooting Trevor Bauer's argument in the foot. Then the judge leaves for, it didn't seem like 5 minutes. It didn't seem like a couple minutes. And she was probably looking up something, I would imagine, some past case to cite or something. And she starts to come out and starts her statement and her ruling, I guess, by saying that there's enough there that you could reasonably say there was some sort of relationship. Again, leading me to believe she was going to extend this. Then, however, she gets into 2 important parts, which we'll talk about now. One, that the accuser omitted messages in her initial filing. These are the text messages that Sean Hawley and Trevor Bauer's defensive team really attacked the accuser on. That you showed all these text messages that show he did this to you, he was trying to help you and contact you, but you didn't show these other messages where he agreed not to contact you anymore, and he hasn't contacted you in over a month since you filed the restraining order. And so that was a big part of what the judge said. She believed that there was misleading information to why the original temporary restraining order was granted. And that's solely based on her saying that Trevor Bauer in that original filing was calling her incessantly, multiple times a day, every day, was texting her nonstop. And that just wasn't the case by the time she filed this ex parte at the end of June. It was actually, maybe he was doing it right after the incident happened at the end of May, but had not contacted her in over a month by the time this was filed. So the judge really hammered on that point. And then the second point, which I think, crazy to say, Trevor Bauer's team did a good job proving, which is if Trevor Bauer is violent or only does these things during sex, if he's rough, if he's, participating in BDSM or just rough, violent sex in the bedroom, he is only a threat to her in the bedroom. And if he has not contacted her now in many months and is planning on never seeing her again and never doing anything in the bedroom, then why would you need the restraining order against him? And so that's why the judge ruled to deny the extension. This is for fans out there and your listeners. This does not exonerate Trevor Bauer in any way. This does not mean he is innocent of the crimes that he was being accused of. All this means is that this particular judge did not see him as an immediate threat to her and to have a restraining order for 5 more years against him. She believed that Trevor Bauer would stay away from her, never contact her again, and never embark in a sexual relationship with her again. And that the original restraining order was misleading because he wasn't calling and texting her every day like she made it seem at the time. So that's where that is in the case. But, and I'm sure you'll ask about this next, there is not necessarily a legal precedent, but this is the first time a judge, an actual judge, has listened to the facts of the case, has listened to the testimony, and made a ruling. So to me, that is not quite a precedent, but it starts the ball rolling as far as what we could see happen when it comes to the Pasadena police investigation, a potential civil trial, the MLB's potential investigation, and essentially Trevor Bauer's future in baseball. When we always talk about rape or sexual assault, when a woman is able to say no and not give her consent. But what if she says yes to some things, meaning sexual intercourse,
and was not expecting that,
rough play, slapping, choking, etc., but then she goes unconscious.
Yeah.
And now while she's unconscious, she's accusing Trevor Bauer of then punching her repeatedly in the face.
Right. That's what I was talking about with the weird ruling, because they were using the language of the limits.
Correct. And what they used was an admission of risk, basically assumption of risk, excuse me. That was the word she used. The assumption of risk in this instance is that if you have agreed and consented to having sex with somebody and it's going to be rough, I'm going to be choked, I'm going to be slapped, I'm going to be thrown around a little bit. there's an assumption of risk there that you're going to potentially end up with bruises, cuts, some of the things she ended up with. Now, her point is like, I didn't consent to getting punched in the face and having 2 black eyes. I didn't consent. And this is something I don't think was talked about enough during the hearing or proved, but she's claiming that there was anal sex while she was unconscious. Trevor Bauer's team is saying that's not the case. So that'll be interesting to see if that would come out in a criminal trial or a civil trial, and if she has the medical records to prove that or not. But she's saying what happened while I was unconscious was not consent. And California law, if you are unconscious, you're not able to withdraw your consent.
Yes.
You have to be conscious to do that. That's the law. And that is what is the criminal investigation by the Pasadena Police Department is hinging on. And to me, why it's taking so long is how can we prove that? Because right now, the only 2 people in the room are him and her. So who knows if she was truly unconscious when these things were happening or not, is him or her, is Trevor or the accuser. And that's going to be very difficult to prove or disprove in a court of law. And what I was told from sources was that, and this was a month ago, when it first started, that the Pasadena Police Department was really, they know those base facts right off the bat. What they were trying to do was dig deeper into her past sexual relationships. The fact that we've uncovered and discovered she was an alcoholic and has these one-offs with baseball athletes in the past. His previous relationships, like we see this other Ohio restraining order ex parte that was filed in Ohio by another woman that Trevor Bauer was in a relationship with, who she claims he hit her and choked her during sex. So the police are trying to get as much evidence as they can, digging into both people's past here to see if they can develop a pattern that could help prove what we just talked about, that part of consent when she was unconscious. So to me, I don't think there's going to be enough to bring charges against him. So I believe that's going to then lead to the accuser suing him in civil court for financial damages in this. And she should, because that's the next step for her, at least. So that's what I think will happen next.
So thank you to all the guests that we have shown all their past interviews for Empty the Bench for 2021 here on this best of Empty the Bench. But we got one more for you. Wait, I'm getting word in my ear about a potential update to the MLB negotiations. Oh, wait a minute. No. My headphone was just acting up. I apologize.
Oh, come on. Don't be like Rob Manfred and lie.
It's a great segue because we've actually got part of this interview is probably one of the funniest, intentionally funniest answers that we've gotten from a guest.
And of course, it's because of my dumb question that we.
Of course it is.
You roped him in, and he, to his credit, he did not back down. He gave the diplomatic answer, and then he said what he really felt.
Let me admit one thing. I know you say I ask dumb questions, but I usually get the entertaining answers.
You got the entertaining answer, absolutely. In this situation, you did.
Okay, let's explain who this is. This is another return guest. He has been on Empty the Bench broadcast a couple of times last year when we were going through the whole COVID mess with MLB. Now, here he is talking about the ongoing MLB lockout. This is Jesse Rogers of ESPN, specifically ESPN 1000 over in Chicago and on ESPN.com. So Jesse, he is a familiar face to this podcast. He talked a whole lot about MLB lockouts, about the issues at hand, what's prevalent, what's the biggest thing. He talked about the need for compromise and how that we just cannot have this go into this season and have canceled games.
Well, let's put it this way. If he can deal with my shenanigans and answer my questions intelligently, he's a good guest. And basically the way I would say, Jesse is the number 2 insider behind Jeff Passan at ESPN when it comes to covering these meetings. He's inside the meetings, including that dumb 7-minute meeting that they apparently had before the lockout in Texas. But we don't talk about that. But yeah. So it's a great interview. Definitely check it out. And yeah, and when we're done with this interview, we'll wrap it all up and we'll tell you what's going to go on in the second episode.
So let's throw it to Jesse.
We talk about the one or two issues that they might be able to win. What would of these issues, because there's several, we have the time in terms of getting arbitration, the service time and how service time is judged. We've had controversies about that, namely like with the Seattle Mariners. I think it was earlier this year or the end of last year about the manipulation of service time. Would that probably be the biggest concern?
No, in my opinion, the two big ones are arbitration and free agency. Okay, we'll get back to that in a moment. So if they could win on one of those two, I think they'll have to relent on the other stuff. The other option is to win on 3 or 4 other things, including service time manipulation, tanking issues, and not get any movement on arbitration and free agency. This is just me spitballing, really, just to give you what's really big and what's not. Now, tanking's big as well, but I don't know the real solution to getting 30 teams to spend every year unless there's a salary cap, both a floor and a ceiling. And the league offered a floor with a little bit lower of a ceiling, and the players said no. So I don't know if as long as there's enough teams spending, and right now there are. I mean, I wish the Pirates would spend. I wish a few teams would spend. The Rangers are all of a sudden. So those go in cycles. So they could try to win on the edges on 3 or 4 things, or go for a big win, arbitration or free agency. And those are two things. The rules set up with arbitration and free agency have been around for decades. So it's not like the owners are just going to give in. Well, we've had this since 1975, 6 years to free agency. Why should we give that away? So I think they need to focus on one big one or maybe a few small ones, but you can't get everything if you're the players.
So let's get to the, I guess, the burning question in the room, or talking about Tony Clark. That seems to be a name that's very controversial because he can't seem to handle the negotiations as well as the players would like. What did you make of his quote, first of all, that kind of circulated everywhere? Did you see that quote?
Which one?
The one where he talks about the, I guess, the lockout being drastic and unnecessary.
Unnecessary measure.
Yeah. That's the point the union is going to hammer home here. The lockout was an active thing done by the owners, right? They locked out the players. They want to make sure of that, because the other side of that is a strike, but that's not what's going on. So he's saying, why don't we just keep negotiating and keep free agency going and everything's fine? And the owners are saying, well, this thing could drag out forever. Then this might force some things, force the issue. And Manfred made a point of saying this isn't a punitive lockout. This is what he called a defensive lockout, meaning we do it now instead of March 1st, when we start to lose games. So the rhetoric is the rhetoric. I mean, Tony Clark was reelected after 16. So if things don't work out for the players, it's on them. He brought in a negotiator in Bruce Meyer. If he doesn't get it done, it's on the union leadership. And I would assume that would be it for Tony Clark. And that's why also they're going to dig in, because Tony, he's got, this is it. Like he's almost got nothing to lose, in the sense, like if he loses, his job is done. And if he wins, he looks great. So you may as well dig in and try to get a win. And I think he will. I think the owners, I may be wrong, but they're going to have to give in on something.
Well, I just wanted to follow up. Did they bring in Meyer because they didn't trust Tony Clark's negotiating skills?
No, it's not so much that. I mean, they lost out. And look, Tony's not a lawyer. There's monetary things, economic things that are tied together that you need a labor lawyer to address. Just like, I mean, Manfred has negotiated before, but it's not like Manfred and Tony are doing the major negotiating. It's their lieutenants. So, but Tony's right there along the way, and obviously has thoughts. Not everything is a pure economic, complicated formula. So it's not anything more than that. They just wanted to bring in someone good because they lost last time.
So Tom's going to laugh at this next question, because I think he knows where I'm going with this, with Commissioner Rob Manfred. I've been very rough on Rob Manfred over our podcast, because I just think he's not doing a good job as the commissioner of baseball. How would you rate him on a 1 to 10, from COVID to how he handled COVID to the negotiations now to some of the rules, the spider tack? I could go on and on and on the list. How would you rate the job that he's doing now?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a 10. I think his problem, Adam Silver, I think, really has done a good job of ingratiating himself with the players. And I think as commissioner, even though you work for the owners, you need to do that. You need to show the players you care about them, you care about the sport. Now, I do think sometimes, some of it he gets a raw deal. I mean, what commissioner is beloved? Even Adam Silver takes some abuse. Goodell is hated. Bettman's been hated. So let's not pretend like it's an easy job and there's guy that's left. But I think if you polled people like Adam Silver. So it's kind of he's shown the way, more a recent hire. So Manfred could be a little bit warmer with the players, a little bit more caring, even if it's just rhetoric. So I don't know. It's out of 10, 5 or 6. Maybe a 5. I don't know. I really don't know. It's such a difficult question. I no more than that. Let's put it that way. 5 or 6. It's not a 0.
I agree with you.
Maybe it will be a 0 when maybe it's a 4. Maybe it will be a 0 when if they lose games next year. But I don't. It's such a 4 to 6. I mean, just average.
Thank you again to Jesse Rogers. Thank you again to Michael Duarte, Bruce Murray, Zig Fracassi, Jimmy Traina, and Jay Mariotti. All of them making appearances on this Empty the Bench channel. All of them giving their expertise, their thoughts on some of the big issues of sports in 2021, whether it was in the sports media, whether it was on the field issues, off the field issues. Speaking of big sports news of 2021, that leads into our best of for next week, episode 2, for the best of Empty the Bench for 2021, where we look back at some of the bigger sports headlines here in this year, whether it was on the field issues like the Aaron Rodgers debacle or off the field issues like the Deshaun Watson case. We have a look at some of the headlines that dominated the sports world this year.
Why do I have a feeling that Nick is going to be pissed off in a lot of these clips?
I usually am. That's kind of my default mode here. So really, it's just normal me.
No, but I'm saying it's going to be a lot of COVID. So just wait. You're going to see Nick go from a 1 to a million in about 2 seconds flat.
Yep, pretty much.
We're at the end of the season, and there's still COVID stuff.
I mean, what was it? At the beginning of this week, we had 40 positive COVID tests in the NFL.
Like I told you before, it's a full circle moment.
It's
Who's
the
ready?
What were you going to say?
I was going to say, who's ready for Tuesday Night Football again?
Not me, not me, not me.
I was just going to end it. It's the circle of life, and
It's boring.
In the circle.
But we don't want you hitting circles. What we instead want you to do is hit the like button, hit that rectangle that's called the subscribe button, and then hit the bell.
That's right. Geometry. It helps.
Nick, you're not good at geometry. You shouldn't be speaking about that.
Yes, I know I can't math, but I know what buttons are. Push them.
Yes,
Nick,
we have opposable thumbs. We can push buttons.
Nick, do you know what this shape is that I'm doing with my fingers?
Rhombus?
Wow, that's impressive. That's geometry, Nick.
It's not right, but it is geometry.
Just be careful. If you math too hard, you might end up like Aaron Rodgers showing your toes on television.
Ah, my brain hurts.
Thank you, Karen. All right. Make sure to hit the like button, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell, whether it's for get notifications about this show or all the other shows here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. And there's more to come, whether it's Beyond the Bench, Here Now, the News, Living Life, or some of future podcasts that might be coming very, very soon.
Yes, we're a giant monster, so either come with us or you're going to get crushed.
Exactly.
So ring the bell, as Vince McMahon would say.
Damn it.
Damn it. All right. For Nick Morgeson and Nick Federa, I'm Tom Aldano. We will see you next week for episode 2 of the best of Empty the Bench 2021. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, and see you next week.